And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Well, looking at the forecast maps here for the next couple of days for tonight, front moving into the slowly moving eastward here brings rain into Atka and increased winds there. Otherwise, remnants of this dying front in the interior here. Still clouds, areas of light snow associated with it, mostly over the east side here for the night tonight, but high pressure to the north, fair skies and light winds here for the north slope up to the Arctic coast with clear skies in areas of the Brooks Range, and windy here and dry for the Panhandle. Then for tomorrow, we've got increasing winds again as this high drops in. Another Arctic high pushes into the Northwest Territories and the Yukon there. That tightens the gradient again tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night into Saturday. And there's a high wind warning out for the Juneau-Douglas area for gusts of 60 miles an hour. Otherwise, nice conditions here across all the interior, really, with some variable clouds, mostly in the west here and then along the Alaska Range area, but mostly clear down to the south, Kodiak Island, but not as warm. And then for the western areas here, that front slowly pushing eastward. Now the rain into Atka, so Adak and Atka periods of rain tomorrow, and then that system on Saturday reaches the southwest coast, actually pushing northeastward here as well as eastward, and that'll bring some mixed precipitation with southerly winds, kind of bringing a little bit more warmer air in with it, but snow up here, the Bering Strait along the warm front there into the Brooks Range, northwest coast, Kotzebue in those areas. Dry over the interior, dry for the Arctic coast. A lot of clearing here over southern Alaska again with Kodiak Island, no change. Light winds there into the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay. Still windy over areas of the southeast coast, but dry and mostly clear. Coastal water forecasts for Lynn Canal. Gale warnings tomorrow. North 35 knots, northeast 30, gusts 45 knots for Stevens Passage. And Clarence Strait, northwest at just 15 knots. On the south coast here, small craft advisories, north to northwest, north to northeast winds, 25 knots. North to northeast at 30 knots for the central coast, and then north to northeast at 10 to 25 on the north coast. Then for Saturday, northeast winds all along the coast here with wind speeds of 30 knots for the central and south coast. Up here to the north, 10 to 20 knots. And gale warnings continue for Lynn Canal, north winds at 35 knots, north at 30 knots for Stevens Passage, and now north at 20 for Clarence Strait. Prince William Sound, north winds 15 knots tomorrow. And for the North Gulf Coast, we've got north winds at 15 to 30 knots, gusts of 45 knots here coming out of the Copper River Delta. And for the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, small craft advisories, north winds 25 knots. Southern Cook Inlet, north at 20. Light variable winds north of the Forelands. And that pattern holds through Saturday here for Cook Inlet, north 15, south of the Forelands, and northwest 20 knots, so a little lighter for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands at about 20 knots there. And most of the North Gulf Coast looking at light variable winds for the day Saturday, but over here to the east, northeast at 25, east at 10 for Prince William Sound. And for Kodiak Island, north to northeast winds at 20 to 25 knots. Variable winds at 10 knots here for the Alaska Peninsula. Winds northeast at 20 knots for Bristol Bay. Now southwest winds for Bristol Bay in the forecast for the first day of the weekend. Otherwise the Alaska Peninsula south to southwest at 15 knots and west winds 15 for Kodiak Island. Eastern Aleutians, southeast winds 20 to 30 knots tomorrow. Southeast at 30 knots here for Adak and Atka. And the western Aleutians, southeast there 30 knots from Chitka Island, Kiska to Shimia, west-southwest at 30 to 35 knots. And then for the day Saturday, northwest winds here coming in behind that front that's pushing eastward here. So northwest winds stronger behind the front than in advance of it here. As you can see, Adak and Atka south at 15 with winds of 20 to 30 knots behind the front. And then winds from the south and southeast at about 20 knots also for the eastern Aleutians. And for the southwest coast, we've got for tomorrow, east to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots. Pribilof Island, St. Matthew Island, southeast at 20. And east winds 15 knots for Norton Sound, southeast 15 for St. Lawrence Island. And for Saturday, south winds 15 knots for Norton Sound. St. Lawrence Island, southwest coast, south at 20 knots, seas 4 feet. South at 20 for St. Paul and St. George with 11-foot seas. South 30 knots for St. Matthew Island. And for the Arctic coast, pretty light winds, all these areas tomorrow. South at 10 knots here for the central and east side. East at 10 knots for the western Arctic coast and the Chukchi Sea. East winds 10 to 20 knots. And for the day on Saturday, east winds 10 to 15 knots for the central and east side, and northeast winds 15 to 20 knots for the western Arctic coast. East winds 15 to 20 knots for the Chukchi Sea.